Well, Donald Trump is in retreat tonight. And he is doing what presidents in retreat always do, trying to make retreat not look like surrender. Donald Trump is now telling reporters that he had pleasant phone calls with the governor of Minnesota and the mayor of Minneapolis, the same people who just last week he was calling corrupt. He called them, quote, whacked out. And today, he said his call with the governor could not have been nicer. That is Donald Trump in retreat. That is Donald Trump in reversal. That is Donald Trump on his way to defeat, because the history of the most important moral protests in this country shows that the protesters always win. And that means Donald Trump is on his way to defeat in Minnesota. It means that the way Donald Trump is handling his presidency is on his way to major defeat in the congressional elections. And in the next presidential election, it means Donald Trump's chosen successor, J.D. Vance, will be crushed by the weight of Donald Trump and Trumpism in the next presidential election. And Trumpism will be defeated, because when justice is on their side, the protesters always win. Today, Donald Trump chose his words very carefully to describe his retreat.
We have Tom Homan there now. We put him in there. He's great. And they met with the governor, the mayor, everybody else, and we're going to de-escalate a little bit.
Donald Trump learned that word from Richard Nixon, de-escalate. Richard Nixon won the presidency in 1968 campaigning on a lie. The Nixon lie then was that he had a secret plan to end the war in Vietnam. He had no plan at all. Instead, Richard Nixon expanded the war in Vietnam, spreading his version of the Vietnam War into Cambodia and Laos. And advised by the always wrong Henry Kissinger about Vietnam, Nixon tried to bomb the Vietnamese into submission. And when nothing worked, Richard Nixon kept doing it because, like Lyndon Johnson before him, he was haunted by the prospect of becoming the first American president to lose a war. He was haunted by the prospect of retreat. And in running for re-election 4 years later in 1972, with the Vietnam War still raging, the lying candidate who said he had a secret plan to end the war 4 years earlier now said this, quote, "We have offered a de-escalation of the fighting. We have offered a ceasefire with a deadline for withdrawal of all American forces." That is when Donald Trump learned the word de-escalate. 1972. Graduated from college in 1968. He got a phony medical deferment from the draft, so he was never in danger of going to Vietnam. He was happily living off his father's wealth in 1972 when Richard Nixon began teaching Donald Trump the word de-escalate. We all learned that word then. The American presidency had to invent a word for retreat, and de-escalate became that word. And now it's Donald Trump's word. De-escalate is the word Republican presidents use when they know they are losing, when they know they are in retreat, and when they know they are on their way to defeat. First, Donald Trump said there was absolutely no reason to investigate the obvious murder of Alex Preddy in Minneapolis on Saturday morning. And now Donald Trump says this.
Do you believe that Alex Preddy's death was justified?
Well, you know, we're doing a big investigation. I want to see the investigation. I'm going to be watching over it. I want a very honorable and honest investigation. I have to see it myself.
There was no investigation. Now there's a big investigation. Honorable presidents do not watch over investigations. Honorable presidents do not say we need an investigation and then have protesters force them to at least pretend that there will be something that Donald Trump can call an investigation. The protesters forced Donald Trump to say that today, that there's going to be a big investigation. Joe Biden, who lived his oath of office every day of his presidency, reminded us today what presidents are supposed to sound like when he released this statement, quote, "What has unfolded in Minneapolis this past month betrays our most basic values as Americans. We are not a nation that guns down our citizens in the street. We are not a nation that allows our citizens to be brutalized for exercising their constitutional rights. No single person can destroy what America stands for and believes in, not even a president. If we, all of America, stand up and speak out, we know who we are. It's time to show the world. More importantly, it's time to show ourselves Now justice requires full, fair, and transparent investigations into the deaths of the two Americans who lost their lives in the city they called home. First, Donald Trump said Renee Good and Alex Preddy deserve to die for being on the same street that his ICE officers and Border Patrol officers were on. Now he says just one of those, because of just the obviously caught on video murders, should be investigated. That's his new position. And at the same time today, Donald Trump blamed Alex Preddy for being murdered because he had his licensed handgun with him when Donald Trump's agents decided to beat him George Floyd style face down on that Minneapolis street.
You know, you can't have guns. You can't walk with your gun.
What about the second amendment?
You can't walk with your gun. You can't do that. But it's a very unfortunate.
Well, that's what's unfortunate about it. If you deserve to be killed now in Donald Trump's America, if you are carrying a licensed firearm in a state where it is legal to carry that firearm, and you're not a Trump supporter, that's the key part. Donald Trump's definition of your right to carry firearms depends on who you vote for. Donald Trump's allies now are deeply concerned that he doesn't seem to understand the script of the pro-gun party that he is supposed to be the leader of. But Donald Trump has never understood anything about Republican policy. He has just rattled off the talking points that Steve Bannon gave him in 2016 about guns and abortion and taxes. When Donald Trump said, you can't have guns, he had no idea that he was saying something that was going to upset so many of his public gun-carrying supporters. He's just a bad actor who can't remember a bad script.
Do you agree with the assessment from some of your own officials that Alex Preddy is a domestic terrorist or an assassin?
Well, I haven't heard that, but certainly he shouldn't have been carrying a gun. But hey, look, bottom line, everybody in this room, we view that as a very unfortunate incident, okay? Right. Everyone, right. Unless you're a stupid person, very, very unfortunate incident. I don't like that he had a gun.
That is the only thing he is supposed to like about Alex Preddy, that he had a gun. The only thing. But Donald Trump truly doesn't understand that part of the Republican script that he's been fed for years. And in that answer, Donald Trump managed to say that the White House Deputy Chief of Staff, who would never be allowed to work in any other White House in any capacity, Stephen Miller, is a stupid person. Donald Trump said, quote, everyone, unless you're a very stupid person, knows that's a very unfortunate incident. So unless you are a stupid person, you are supposed to think it's a very unfortunate incident. Donald Trump's Secretary of Homeland Security, who one Republican senator tonight is demanding should resign, Kristi Noem, said that Alex Preddy committed an act of domestic terrorism. Those were her words. Donald Trump, in effect, declared his Homeland Security Secretary today to be a stupid person in that statement he just made. Stephen Miller said Donald Trump's his deeply perverse and out of control Deputy White House Chief of Staff, Stephen Miller, said Alex Preddy was, quote, a would-be assassin who tried to murder federal law enforcement. That means Donald Trump called Stephen Miller a stupid person today, and you just saw it on video, and that would make Donald Trump right about Stephen Miller for the first time, if that's what he meant. It appears that Stephen Miller is in big trouble in the Trump White House tonight for leading Donald Trump this far into this madness. The always tired and lazy Donald Trump is reported in the New York Times to have held a 2-hour meeting last night with Kristi Noem, and Stephen Miller was not allowed in the room. The White House Chief of Staff was there, the White House Press Secretary was there, the White House Communications Director was there, and Stephen Miller, the architect of Donald Trump's hatred and violence campaign against immigrants and American citizens, was not there. And you know Stephen Miller wanted to be there, but Donald Trump didn't want him there. And there are reports of the meeting in which Kristi Noem blamed Stephen Miller for the language that she used about Alex Preddy being a terrorist. And in Donald Trump's first term in the White House, his most common method of trying to solve his problems was firing people. He set a record for the number of White House chiefs of staff in 4 years. Stephen Miller should be worried about that tonight after watching Donald Trump remove the person who Stephen Miller championed as the leader of the Trump invasion forces in Minnesota, Border Patrol agent Gregory Bovino. Donald Trump traded the out-of-control Bovino, whose wardrobe appears to resemble the Gestapo overcoats worn by Adolf Hitler's most trusted murderers. Bovino is another one of those stupid persons, according to Donald Trump's definition of a stupid person, because Bovino celebrated his agent's murder of Alex Preddy and Renee Good. And he spent the weekend on social media attacking Republicans who found fault with what was going on in Minneapolis. Donald Trump said, quote, "I haven't heard that." When he was asked that question, do you agree with the assessment from some of your own officials that Alex Preddy is a domestic terrorist or an assassin? And you heard Donald Trump say, well, I haven't heard that. What Stephen Miller said is literally Exhibit A in this state of Minnesota case against the Trump administration, demanding that Trump officials preserve all of the evidence in their possession in the homicide cases of Renee Good and Alex Preddy. The exhibits filed with the judge prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Donald Trump's administration will not conduct a real investigation of either one of those homicide cases. And Exhibit A is Stephen Miller's tweet saying, quote, "A domestic terrorist tried to assassinate federal law enforcement." That is Exhibit A that Donald Trump is pretending he doesn't know about. Donald Trump knows what his poisonous and out of control Deputy White House Chief of Staff said, and that's why even Donald Trump wouldn't allow Stephen Miller in the room last night during his meeting with Kristi Noem. Today, Donald Trump said he's just shaking up the lineup by replacing Gregory Bovino with Tom Homan, his so-called border czar, who has no real job in the administration. Tom Homan is in a position created by Donald Trump that has never existed in the federal government before and has no actual responsibilities. And most importantly, does not require Senate confirmation, which Tom Homan could never get, because we now know that in the last Trump presidential campaign, Tom Homan was caught on video by FBI undercover agents accepting $50,000 in cash from those FBI undercover agents in a payoff that was part of an FBI criminal investigation of Tom Homan, who of course says he did nothing wrong. That criminal investigation of Tom Homan was immediately killed when Donald Trump took the oath of office. All of this is happening. Bovino is out because Donald Trump is retreating and the protesters are winning. Stephen Miller was out in the Oval Office meeting last night, in that crucial meeting about the situation in Minneapolis, because Donald Trump is retreating and the protesters are winning. The protesters kept Stephen Miller out of that room last night. Donald Trump is calling his own officials like Kristi Noem and Stephen Miller and others stupid because they have not said that the murder of Alex Preddy is an unfortunate incident, Donald Trump's language. And Donald Trump said, quote, "You have to be a stupid person if you don't think it's a very unfortunate incident." And he said that because the protesters are winning. Protesters forced those words into Donald Trump's mouth. The protesters forced Donald Trump to say that. The protesters always win. That is our American history of moral protest, of important protest in this country. The most important moral protests in this country all have three characteristics. They're always long, people always die, and in the end, the protesters always win. That's true of the civil rights protests of the 1960s that took decades to achieve, the Civil Rights Act and the Voting Rights Act, and there were murdered martyrs in that protest movement. Edgar Evers in 1963, Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. in 1968. And by the time Dr. King was murdered for protesting, he had also become a protester against the Vietnam War. And that anti-war protest also took years, and people died in that protest. 4 19 and 20-year-olds were shot and killed on the campus of Kent State University by National Guard in 1970. William Schroeder, Alison Krauss, Jeffrey Miller, Sandra Lee Shore. They did not die in vain. The Vietnam War ended years earlier than it would have ended because of those heroic anti-war protesters who gave their lives but saved lives. They saved the lives of thousands and thousands of American soldiers, forcing an end to that war years before that war would have ended without the anti-war protest movement. What Richard Nixon called de-escalating became a full retreat and surrender by the American military in Vietnam and fleeing from Vietnam with the last helicopter, lifting the last Americans to escape the war zone from the roof of the American embassy in Saigon. There are thousands of men who are alive today in America who are fathers, and some of them are grandfathers, because the protesters forced Richard Nixon to end the draft in 1972, 3 years before the war was ended. And because the protesters forced an end to the draft, young men with draft cards got to go on with their lives. Their children might not know that they have protesters to thank for the very life of their fathers and their grandfathers. I was one of those people. I was old enough and in college to get a draft notice just a few weeks before the draft ended in 1972. Went to the South Boston military base to get my physical. I passed the physical. You go home in those days, you wait 2 weeks, and a letter comes in the mail telling you when to report to Fort Dix in New Jersey for basic training. And when I was waiting for that letter in those 2 weeks, that's exactly when Richard Nixon was forced by the protesters to end the draft, and the draft ended that day. It wasn't phased in. It ended immediately. And people like me who had draft cards in our hands, waiting for the induction notice to come in the mail, were suddenly free. We got to live. We got to live our lives. The protesters won that for us. The protesters always win. It takes longer than it should, and people die, but the protesters always win. Alex Preddy's sister released a statement today saying, quote, Alex was kind, generous, and had a way of lighting up every room he walked into. He was incredibly intelligent and deeply passionate, and he made people feel safe. But most importantly, he was my brother. I had the privilege of being his little sister for 32 years. I will never be able to hug him, laugh with him, or cry to him again because of those thugs. And that is a pain no words can fully capture. Alex always wanted to make a difference in this world, and it's devastating that he won't be here to witness the impact he was making. Through his work at the VA, caring for the sickest patients, and passion to advance cancer research, he touched more lives than he probably ever realized. All Alex ever wanted was to help someone, anyone, even in his very last moments on this earth. He was simply trying to do just that. I want to thank everyone who has reached out to my family and me, whether you knew Alex personally or not. The messages, posts, and overwhelming positivity shared about him truly reflect his character, work ethic, and passions. My brother is and always will be my hero. When does this end? How many more innocent lives must be lost before we say enough? Hearing disgusting lies spread about my brother is absolutely gut-wrenching, and my family is deeply grateful so many people have stood up and helped tell his truth. He would be very proud. Michaela Preddy said, quote, Alex wanted to make a difference in this world, and it's devastating that he won't be here to witness the impact he was making. That echoes a line from her parents' statement that I read to you last night, in which Michael and Susan Preddy said, quote, Alex wanted to make a difference in this world. Unfortunately, he will not be with us to see his impact. Michael and Susan Preddy will see their son's impact. Michaela Preddy will see her big brother's impact. Alex Preddy has Donald Trump in retreat tonight. Alex Preddy's name takes its place in the history of American protest for justice, along with Renee Good's name on the tragic honor roll of Americans who have given their lives in protest for justice. Protesters always win, and it always takes longer than it should, and people always die. Victory is coming to the protesters, according to the polls in the next congressional election. And less than 3 years from now, the protesters will win with the election of a president who will never invade American cities with people who Michaela Preddy rightly calls those thugs. Michaela Preddy and her parents, Michael and Susan Preddy, will see Alex Preddy's impact. They will see the day when Alex Preddy wins, because in America, protests, important protests for social justice, always win. We'll be right back. We have breaking news at this hour. The Washington Post reports, quote, 2 Border Patrol agents fired at Alex Preddy during Saturday's fatal shooting in Minneapolis, according to a statement sent to some members of Congress by the Department of Homeland Security that provides the first official timeline of the deadly encounter that has sent shockwaves across the country. The statement, based on a preliminary review, makes no mention of Preddy brandishing a weapon. That contradicts administration comments in the immediate aftermath of the confrontation, when senior officials described the 37-year-old as a direct threat to federal officers. Joining us now is Congressman Jamie Raskin of Maryland. He's the top Democrat on the House Judiciary Committee and will be the chairman of that committee if Democrats win the House in November. Congressman Raskin, I want to get right to this new reporting of what's been transmitted to Congress. And I'm just wondering about, it makes me first of all wonder, what would be the legal implications of Kristi Noem trying to continue her lie in a report like this to Congress? If she were to say to Congress, he was brandishing a weapon, he was a domestic terrorist, why would she be reluctant to do that in a direct communication with Congress?
Well, she might not want to be impeached for it, to start off with it. She might not want a bipartisan condemnation for lying to Congress, and she might not want to be prosecuted herself, depending on the exact circumstances and context within which she serves up a lie. But look, they've been lying from the beginning about both of these cases, calling Renee Good, calling Alex Preddy domestic terrorists, claiming that the ICE officers were acting in self-defense, which they most assuredly were not. These were cold-blooded killings and likely murders by the agents that undertook to kill defenseless people. And, this is a massive assault on civil liberties, of course. These are people who are just exercising their First Amendment rights to petition in public, to freely, peacefully assemble in public, to speak and to record, because the people are the press too. And everybody who has a cell phone has the right to use that cell phone to record what's happening in public, including with agents of the government. And of course, in the case of Mr. Preddy, it's also an assault on Second Amendment rights as well, because he was exercising his right to bear arms within the confines of state and local law. He never drew a weapon, he never brandished a weapon, and the weapon was taken from him. And then even after it was taken from him, he was fatally shot, apparently around 9 or 10 times by the officials. And that's what's causing such a scandal and such outrage across the country, because it's really a violation of every right contained in the Bill of Rights. I mean, it's an absolute violation of the right to life, liberty, and property against false deprivation without due process by the government. And that's exactly what it was. And so the rights of the people are being trampled, and it is causing a major revulsion and a major reaction, as you're pointing out, and a spreading nationwide movement totally across party lines and geographic lines in the country.
And the new videos that have emerged yesterday and today clearly show that the agents, as they're firing their guns, are literally walking backwards. They are calmly actually walking backwards from what is by then a body that's now getting hit with the 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th bullet or more. And there's absolutely no threat whatsoever. He may have been killed by the very first bullet fired. But they're literally just walking backwards, creating more and more safe space between them and the person they continue to fire at.
I mean, it's utterly cowardly, and I think we saw cowardly actions by these ICE officials in both of these cases, and in both you can see officers running away from the scene of the crime, almost as if they're concerned to not be associated with it as quickly as possible. They're certainly more concerned about their own complicity and knowledge of their complicity than they are in doing anything to help the victims of the killing. But the idea that it would take 4 or 5 or 6 real law enforcement officers to subdue one suspect is just absurd and ridiculous. And law enforcement across the country is in an uproar about that. But then the idea that after he's subdued and after they have taken his weapon from him, that they go ahead and shoot him, makes it a cold-blooded killing.
You have communicated with the Attorney General about what you need to know about this investigation, and she knows you're on your way to being chairman of this committee a year from now, sooner than a year from now. She's going to have to answer this eventually. I just want to read some of what you're demanding from her, the issues you want to explore. Your message to her today said, despite the court order, local officials are reportedly still being shut out of the investigation as federal officials refuse to disclose basic information, such as the identity of the federal agents who shot Mr. Preddy. The Department of Justice cover-up of these killings did not occur spontaneously or in isolation. Someone affirmatively ordered FBI agents to drop the civil rights investigation into Agent Ross. Someone affirmatively ordered federal law enforcement to instead investigate Ms. Good's widow. Someone affirmatively ordered line agents to block state prosecutors from accessing key evidence. Someone is now taking the same actions with regard to the killing of another American citizen. And that's the kind of thing that, as chairman of the committee, you will be able to get real answers to that, if not sooner.
We want to know exactly who gave those orders. We want to know who's responsible, and we want to hold them accountable. And as you're saying, that's the difference between having the gavel or not having the gavel, having the subpoena power or not having the subpoena power. But when we get it, we will make sure that there will be accountability for the killers of Alex Preddy and Renee Good. We are going to nail that down. The Department of Justice was created in the wake of the Civil War to try to enforce civil rights and justice for the freed slave population and to try to create some semblance of equality of rights under the law. Well, this Department of Justice has shown no interest in actually investigating who's responsible for these cold-blooded killings of U.S. citizens in the streets of the heartland of America. And they've moved to cover up the possibility of our finding out what is in the evidence, and they've moved to blockade investigations by real law enforcement officials in Minnesota and in Minneapolis. And I'm glad that Attorney General Keith Ellison in Minnesota and the governor of Minnesota Walz are pushing and demanding in court that the evidence not be destroyed or removed, and that it be turned over to state and local authorities.
We've had the local prosecutor, the county attorney, Mary Moriarty, on this program, and she says she has opened a homicide investigation in both of these cases, and she is going to proceed with whatever evidence she can get. It seems likely that the agents involved in these have left the state of Minnesota. It seems likely that the Trump administration would simply move them out of the jurisdiction by now.
Yeah, well, criminal suspects, of course, can leave the jurisdiction. That doesn't absolve them of the crime. Stephen Miller wants the people operating under his vicious, lawless instructions to believe that they have absolute immunity. They do not. They have qualified immunity, speaking legally, which means they have to be operating within the bounds of law, under the scope of their employment, and they've got to be acting reasonably. And if they step outside of that by acting unreasonably and outside of the law, then they lose that protection. Now, admittedly, the Trump Department of Justice and the Roberts Court have been doing everything in their power to try to undermine that, but it is still the law that they are not covered by absolute immunity. And one of the things that we need to do, again, operating as much as possible in a bipartisan way, is to get all Americans together to say that the rights contained in the Bill of Rights need to be fortified now by legislation. For example, everybody's got the right to be filming law enforcement in public. That's just part of the First Amendment. Everybody has a right before their door is knocked down by a government agent to have a search warrant issued based on probable cause by a neutral, independent magistrate that is in the judicial branch of government, not by the executive branch that is trying to knock your door down. It's not their warrant that's needed. It's a warrant from a neutral, impartial magistrate that can take their petition. These are the basic precepts of the Bill of Rights. They're being trampled by the Trump administration on a daily basis. And again, I just want to thank the people of Minnesota, as you've been doing, Lawrence, for standing up every day and showing the rest of America what we need to do. We need to stand up every day against this reign of terror and lawlessness by the Trump administration and fight back at every turn. And we are going to get through it, and we are winning every day, and our forces are growing all over the country.
Congressman Jamie Raskin, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
My pleasure.
And coming up today, Donald Trump proved once again that he actually doesn't know what the word affordability means. You can watch him wrestle with that word next when Congressman Brendan Boyle joins us. The richest elected official in Washington, who continues to enrich himself every day he is in office, today tried and failed to talk about affordability.
They caused the problem. And then they came up, it's a word that they came up with, affordability. Every time you hear the word, remember, they're the ones that caused the problem. And first time you heard about it was like a few months ago. This election's all about affordability. Well, they're the ones that caused the problem. But nobody knows that. People forget. So they say, oh, affordability, let's vote for the Democrats. It's no, affordability.
Joining us now is Democratic Congressman Brendan Boyle of Pennsylvania. He's the ranking member, the top Democrat on the House Budget Committee, and he's a member of the Important Ways and Means Committee. Congressman Boyle, I'm trying to figure out if Donald Trump is for or against affordability.
I wish what he said had been correct, that all we had to do was say the word affordability and we would automatically win every election. A little bit more complicated than that. But I will actually concede that maybe for the first time ever, the president has actually said something that is honest. He said that it was only a few months ago that he'd ever heard the word affordability. Mm-hmm. Let's not forget, this is a billionaire who from the time he was in kindergarten was transported to school in a limousine. It's not a big surprise to me that the guy has no idea what affordability is, doesn't understand it, has never even heard the word, and he is governed accordingly so that today things are literally more unaffordable than ever, even than they were during the COVID pandemic.
So he went 79 years without hearing the word affordability or any word like it. But he also claimed today in that same talk that inflation is over and he fixed it.
It is hard to keep a straight face because this is such incredible BS. The reality is we were close. Look, I mean, to take a step back, there's no question that the United States, like every other country on earth, faced an inflation spike, the likes of which we hadn't seen since the late 70s, early 1980s. That is when basically the economy came back online right after the pandemic. However, the U.S. actually got out of that inflation crisis quicker than any other major economy. We were back at almost 2% at exactly this time 12 months ago. What happened? Donald Trump became president January 20th last year. And since then, we have seen the return of inflation. We have seen it return with a vengeance, so that today, in fact, costs are much higher than they were when Donald Trump became president. And in the words of Jay Powell, the Trump-appointed Republican chair of the Federal Reserve, they're specifically higher because of Trump's tariff policies.
which everyone knows. I think presidents get too much credit and too much blame for the inflation rate in normal times in any given moment. But if you impose tariffs, you are guaranteeing inflation. That is, by definition, government-produced inflation. It's a sales tax on everything we buy.
Yeah, that's exactly right. And I agree with your first point, actually. I think a lot of times presidents are the economy they inherit. They're somewhat victims of circumstance. I mean, the George W. Bush recession in 2001, 2002 was largely because of 9/11. Poor Jimmy Carter in the 1970s deals with inflation mostly because of decisions that were made during the Nixon era. This is very different. The reason why we're facing inflation today, the reason why we're facing the lowest consumer confidence that we have seen in years is specifically as a result of Trump's tariffs policies that actually make things more expensive for the American people.
Congressman Brendan Boyle, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thank you.
And coming up today, Donald Trump said he's worried about being impeached if the Democrats win the House and the Senate. And one Democrat who's trying to make that happen, at least win the Senate, in November is Alexander Vindman, who's running for Senate in Florida and will join us next. Here's Donald Trump earlier tonight on Fox.
What will happen if Democrats take
they'll
the House?
probably try and impeach me. They'll find something. There'll be something. I made the wrong turn at an exit, and let's impeach him. No, they did that before. They impeached me on a perfect phone call.
And this is what the man who was listening to that phone call in the White House had to say today.
The last time you saw me was here, swearing an oath to tell the truth about a president who broke his. See, my family came to America as refugees to escape tyranny. And I sure as hell was not going to bow down to some wannabe tyrant. This president unleashed a reign of terror and retribution, not just against me and my family, but against all of us. Today, our country is in chaos. Thug militias attacking citizens, tariffs pushing prices sky high, healthcare premiums through the roof. And Florida homeowners are being absolutely screwed because Ashley Moody caved to the big insurance companies. They put Moody in the Senate to be a yes vote for Trump and the billionaires. She's not Florida Senator, she's theirs. I'm Alex Vindman, and I'm running to be your voice in the Senate.
Joining us now is retired Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman. He served as the Director for European Affairs at the National Security Council during the first Trump administration, now running for Senate in Florida. Thank you very much for joining us tonight on your first day as a candidate. What made you decide to run?
Thanks for having me on, Lawrence. Our country is in chaos. There's violence in the streets. People don't feel safe or secure in their homes. And frankly, the system is rigged. It's rigged for the ultra wealthy and it's rigged for the powerful. And all the burdens are being shifted to ordinary Floridians and Americans. I think Floridians in particular are facing the highest insurance rates in the country. Insurance premiums are through the roof. The cost of life here, which is one of the reasons I settled in Florida, is really increasingly out of reach. I'm not a career politician. I served in the military for more than 20 years, including deployment to combat. My commitment was to this country, to defend it against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And I pledged to be there for Americans and for Floridians. The truth is, Ashley Moody is actually in the pockets of special interests. She's the yes vote for everything on the radical Republican, radical MAGA agenda. And that's not what the Floridians are looking for. They're looking for somebody that's an independent actor, somebody that's going to be fighting for costs, fighting to end corruption, cut costs, and end the chaos. And that's what I'm going to provide a huge and stark contrast to my opponent.
I see in your announcement video, this video of what's happening in Minnesota. How important do you think that's going to be in a Florida campaign?
I think it's the safety and security issue is paramount. We have a very large Hispanic community here in Florida. They're seeing folks that look like them. My neighbors
Take us back to that historic day when you heard Donald Trump on the phone speaking to the president of Ukraine and what was essentially an extortion phone call about what he would have to do in order to try to hurt Joe Biden in order to get American aid. When did you realize that you were going to have to say something about that? This, I'm sure, is a question that you're going to get asked a lot during this campaign, how you made that decision.
To me, it was straightforward. I spent my career in the service of this nation. I saw a threat to free and fair elections. I saw an abuse of power. And frankly, that's what I did throughout my career. I stood up and fought for what I was right and what I thought was right and executed my duty. That's in play here in this current administration. I think there is enormous overreach by the Trump administration. I think that in the context of Florida, we have a candidate, or actually the sitting senator that's appointed, handpicked by the elites here in the state, and she's totally fine signing on to an agenda that erodes emergency supports, that erodes healthcare, affordable care subsidies, or Medicaid. This is somebody that's totally fine, wavering to big insurance companies. We have the most expensive insurance rates in this nation, and I think the Floridian population, I'm a Floridian, is looking for somebody that's going to be a fighter to end a fixed system and to cut costs.
Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman, now candidate for Senate in Florida, thank you very much for joining us tonight on your first day as a candidate.
Thank you.
We'll be right back. Florida Senate candidate Alexander Vindman gets tonight's last word.